Welcome to Unfuck Your Life and Relationships with Anita Astley, psychotherapist and author, and Ryan Rosmann, recording studio owner and music producer. This is a podcast like no other. Sit forward, listen in, and get ready to get unfucked from the inside out. Unfuck your life! Unfuck your life!
Hey guys, welcome to another session of Unfuck Your Life and Relationships. I'm your host, Anita Astley, and I'm in studio, High Five Studios, downtown Milwaukee, with my co-host Ryan and lovely Amanda, who is doing all the, technical stuff behind the scenes. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Living the dream.
Yeah, we're living the dream, right? Today, we're going to be talking kind of an open discussion about relationships. And I'm just reflecting back on my week of doing therapy. There's been a lot of talk about looking for the right person, or also related to, is there a right person? Is there that perfect person for me? And it has to do with men and women. But I think as a society, we as women have been more groomed to look for that right man for us and what the rules are to getting that right man. Some of the things that we need to do as a woman to engage him. I don't know, Ryan, what do you think?
Oh,
Well, I know what I can say on that.
I was not. I was. And I don't know. I feel like that is
the perfect man, the perfect woman.
What is? Is that even a thing? Like,
no, it's not a thing. It's not.
You definitely have the things that you want.
Yes,
and but you can't have some unrealistic expectation of like what the absolute perfect thing, because first of all, you're never going to find it.
You're never going to find it.
And you also don't want to go out looking, like setting yourself up for failure, where you're like, if there's no way you can have this combination of things and find that, you're always going to be disappointed. You're going to get jaded. You're going to get turned off from things. And it's going to make you cynical, and just everything is going to be like, you can't approach things that way at all.
But sadly, society sets us up for that failure. My parents set me up for that failure. It's not their fault. And I always say, we don't blame our parents. As I tell my patients, I don't blame my parents. They only did what they were socialized and brainwashed to do also. And then I kind of did it, I kind of did. I was also then looking for the perfect person for myself. The perfect person and the perfect relationship doesn't exist. As I say, we are all imperfectly perfect, and we are forever evolving and changing. Therefore, if we're with somebody and we don't change together, that relationship is not going to work. But again, this concept of Mrs. Right and Mr. Right, I don't believe in that. I believe there are people that are more compatible for us than other people. And I also don't believe that there is this one person that's meant for us in our lifetime. There's 7 billion people on this planet. I'm not sure that one is specially catered and made for me, because...
So you don't think a soulmate or anything like that, or as far as one, but maybe there could be...
I think there can be several. And I think that it's hard because it totally goes against monogamy in some way. We're forced into monogamy. We are for the preservation of the family, but, there's a part of me that thinks, knows that as creatures, we are not meant to be. We are creatures of diversity, and we want diversity. Hence, we could, branch off into all the infidelity that takes place. And I do think people are going to get really mad at me for saying this, but I think if most of us or people could get away with it, they would. The small percentage probably are not honest with themselves. However, I do understand why monogamy exists, for the preservation of the family, the children, and so forth. But by nature, we kind of want to explore and play.
Absolutely. It's just, it's a risk versus reward. Like, for me, going out and having sex with another woman is not worth it for me for what the potential, if I got caught, would happen.
Right.
And sometimes a relationship may be in a situation where that isn't, or somebody has a different moral compass.
Yes.
That's neither right or wrong.
Yeah, I'm not advocating for that at all.
Yeah.
I understand the function of it, and I want to be in a monogamous relationship because of the values and the morals and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is I don't necessarily believe that there's this one magical person
Of
for
course,
me.
yeah,
And
because you could be
I'm
with
that
multiple people
one
in your
magical,
life.
yeah. And I do
Yeah.
I do believe that we can love multiple people at the same time. Why is it that we're only allowed to love one person, or our heart should be only good enough for one person? And I say this not only as a woman of my age who've gone through relationships, and I've lived a long, complicated life in some ways, but I've worked with people for 28 years now who are, there is always this conflict. And I notice this theme, this conflict about attachment and love, right? I love this person, fallen out of love with this person. I'm married to this person, but I have feelings for this person. And we have to box it all into different boxes. And those boxes don't always go together. And then hence we have conflict. And when I think about it more and more, I think, well, what is all this suffering about? And then I've come to the conclusion it's about two things that people mostly suffer with in life. Any guesses?
No.
Attachment and detachment.
Oh, sure.
Most of our issues and most of the people I work with who sit in front of me on most days are talking about a love loss or a love gained, and how to attach and how to detach. Think about
Sure.
that.
Absolutely.
Think of the music. What are songs all about?
Oh yeah. I mean, I always think about this, like there's artists or bands that I've listened to where like like their story of like crazy like heartbreak and like tumultuous life, and then all of a sudden they're married and happy and the music's garbage. It's like, no, don't make this shit. Like break up and so your music's good again. Like like you have to like
in your
artists
darkness.
it's like nobody wants that. Like
No.
I mean, well, I guess maybe a couple of people, but like all the best art and music and movies and everything is sort of like spawned from heartbreak, rejection, from High Fidelity. That
or
whole
being
that
in
monologue
love,
is amazing.
right?
Yeah,
The high of being in love and the lows of being heartbroken and out of love and losing our love. It's all about attachment and detachment. And then it goes back to, also our childhood, about how did in our family of origin, did we learn to attach and then detach? Were our parents smothering in that kind of way? Was that the way they showed love, or were they rejecting in that way? So, and we internalize these ways of loving, attaching and detaching, and then we use those maybe healthy or sometimes very unhealthy ways to attach and detach from people in our life. And then how we deal with those processes defines how we're going to handle them. What do you think, Amanda?
That's super interesting. I think about how my parents' marriage was and so different from yours. I think I don't...
You mean Ryan's?
Ryan's, yeah. Where he was aware that they had, intimacy, and I was not at all with my parents. There was nothing like that. And they didn't have a lot of time even that they spent together. They functioned together.
Yeah.
And so that's something that's very different that I experienced and he experienced. And I think even within our relationship that I feel, I think that Ryan would say that I come to the relationship in a more detached manner.
Absolutely.
And that he's more attached. I think that that's something that we can both hone in on, that we work on, that we actively work on, where, when we're in the house together, he wants to spend all that time one-on-one. And I'm sometimes like, well, you're doing your thing, I'm doing mine. What's the problem?
Yeah.
And it absolutely comes right down from what I saw and witnessed.
Yeah, and what you learn and what you internalize, right?
It wasn't bad.
It wasn't bad.
Which is different. And I mean, we're all a product of our upbringing and environments. And even if we don't realize it, it's subconsciously like what we see is what we know.
What we see is what we learn and what we internalize, and then what we practice. You're bringing up a really good point, and I hate the way today we pathologize so many things, in terms of, I'm a mental health practitioner. So of course, yes, there's a lot of research, there's a lot of verbiage, there's a lot of information and terminology, but I think we almost use it to a fault. I was working with somebody last week and they said to me, they were talking about, their level of commitment and something that they were doing in their relationship. And they used the word needy. My girlfriend said I was way too needy because of this. And I'm listening to it. And I've heard in my years of practice, this neediness and then codependency. I want to talk about that. To me, neediness and codependency implies a certain amount of pathology. And pathology is there's something wrong with you. There's a disease, right? That's what I think about when I think about pathology. And then neediness is a pathology, and so is codependency. Now we have this clinical term. And I just said to him, I said, wait, stop. I said, I'm sorry. That to me is not being needy. That to me is like you have certain needs that are very different than your partner's needs, and the way that you express them and the needs have to be satisfied is different. Doesn't make you needy. Just because you have needs that you want to fulfill doesn't make you needy. Like when you were just talking about, when you're in the house and he wants to spend more time with you and you're like, hey, we're doing our own thing. You didn't turn around and say to him, oh my God, Ryan, you're so needy. I think that's really healthy that you're able to recognize, no, he's not needy. He just has very different needs. And my needs are over here, his are here. How can we talk about them? So I'm not pathologizing his needs or judging them, but we're just going to work around them. So it becomes a healthy dynamic. So good for you guys for doing that.
Yeah.
The other term I hate, codependent.
Oh, sure.
I'm sorry. We are all social creatures. We are born into codependency. And once we leave our family of origin, guess what we do? We go out looking for somebody else to depend on.
Right.
But somehow, oh my God, you're so codependent. There's something, you know how many times I hear that? And I want to depathologize that. We are all codependent. We are all dependent on somebody else because that is our nature. That is our biology.
We all agree that even a sense of community is important. So
Absolutely.
Then to say like, it's so important that you have this strong sense of community, but don't be codependent.
Right.
That's fucked up. And then in our Western culture, we've really romanticized this sense of be an individual, don't be codependent, don't be needy. What's so great about being alone? You can be part of a community, you can be codependent, you can have needs and still be a strong, independent person. They are not mutually exclusive.
There's certain things you just can't do to satisfy yourself of certain needs. Like for me, I love having my head scratched, but I'm not going to sit there doing it myself. Like I want somebody to pet my head every once in a while.
So funny. Oh my God. Okay,
and I'm not codependent because
You're
of
not.
that.
But the whole point is we are all dependent on each other. I believe in this unity, this connection that we have with each other. And I, as a clinician, when I hear, oh my God, he's so needy, she's so needy, you're so codependent. Yeah, fuck, we all are. But there's just different levels of dependency. There's different levels of what I need and expectations and so forth. So, but I just love hearing that healthy dynamic. But all to say, can we try to get rid of this word neediness and codependency?
I totally agree, because there could certainly be times where it's unhealthy, but everything can be unhealthy. Like you have to, be like, oh, if you left me, I would kill myself. Okay, maybe a little too much.
That's unhealthy.
Yeah. But for the most part, I need and depend on Amanda for many things. Our lives are like, I provide and do certain things for her that she needs, and she provides and does certain things for me that I need. And that's the reason we're with somebody.
Yeah.
And just like you were saying, like we have
need
things.
People.
We need people.
We need people.
I want to be in a relationship. I want love. I want affection. I want sexual, I want emotional support. I want all of these things that I can't give myself. And that's why you look for another person to do it.
Yeah. And people who say, I don't need anybody, I hate people, it's because they've been hurt.
Sure.
They need people. They've been hurt.
Therapy.
They've been they need therapy. They've been hurt. They've been disappointed. And when I meet somebody like that, I'm like, oh my God, who has hurt you so much that your reaction is, I don't need somebody? When you're desperately needing somebody, it's actually the opposite of what you're saying and what you're exuding, but you've been so hurt that you're so protected now, right?
And I think as we were working on the early stages of our relationship, I definitely had a sense of wanting to be independent, and had been in where I'd been, coexisting with someone and had the rug pulled out from under me. And that pain, I think, absolutely made it more difficult for me to be accepting of the things he wanted to give in the relationship.
Yeah.
That it was
because you've been hurt.
Because I didn't want to rely, and there's that like, well, then are you going to always be there? Probably not, right? You get scared.
Yeah.
And so that's not something he did to me.
No.
That's something someone else did that I have to work on. And that's where it gets mucky, right? Like that's where
but you have to I think you have to be honest about the things that have happened in your past to your partner when it comes to that too. Like you told me about certain things that happened. So it even as simple as like when we went through our prenup, there were very small things that I'm like, this can be something that can give you a little bit of comfort knowing that if things don't work out with us, that you're not going to be left in a situation where you're like starting over in like a difficult position.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing to like to do. Like we all make concessions like to our partner, like you may have been physically abused. So it's like, all right, this thing can trigger me. So you talk about it, you know about it. And so you do things for the other person to sort of just like make sure that they're comfortable.
Yeah. And I want to point out how I think that's so wonderful that the prenup, generally a prenup is to protect the self.
Yeah.
But when you've told me about this before and I'm listening and I'm thinking, oh my God, a prenup to protect not you, Ryan, but to protect Amanda. And I think that's wonderful because when most people think of a prenup, it's about the self, preservation of the self. If this does not work out, I want to make sure I'm going to be good. But the foundation of your prenup, from what you're telling me, is really for you to, Ryan, to make sure that Amanda is going to be safe and secure if this didn't work out.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, it protects the things that I needed to protect.
Yes.
But I think we were very open about how it's very basic, but there has to be some things that if something doesn't work out, because for me, it works for my life to provide her more financially because she can provide other things that I need.
Yeah.
Right. And if she had, if we broke up, I would also be missing a lot of things too, but there are things that I could do to kind of help to make sure that things were going to be okay. Right. I don't know. I thought that was important, but I think, but
it sounds like you have it in place so she could trust the commitment of the marriage because of your past relationship.
I think it was good in both directions, right? It was difficult and expensive.
I also had my divorce took a longer time just because of a just bad prenuptial like situation.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like good or bad between, Max and I, we obviously we struggled through our divorce as everyone does, but I think I also learned like, hey, this is kind of maybe what you should do a little bit more also.
Well, you learned from it, right?
And Amanda was gracious enough to understand that like I needed to have some protections in place for myself, but hey, there doesn't need to be a negative stigma behind
No, it doesn't.
Like let's create something that works for both of us.
It protects you financially, but also, from what I'm reading into your relationship and what we've shared in the past outside of this podcast, it was also to provide some emotional safety for Amanda, because most people think of the prenup as the financial, and it is mostly, but also so she could commit to you and she felt safe emotionally and demonstrated that you really care for her.
We even put like joint custody of the dog and things
well,
like,
of course
like
that should be in place.
Because like it's
of course that should be in place. But I want to ask Amanda something, because we walked into this room today thinking, what are we going to talk about in this podcast? We generally have an idea. And Amanda has a book. She brought a book with her, and it's not my book, but hey, it's a good book too. Amanda, tell me about this book, because you said, hey, maybe we want to discuss this book. Can you share?
So it's interesting. And talking about commitment. So it's called The Rules. And a friend of mine gave me a copy of this book when I was dating. And she was like, you need to read this book and you need to follow these rules. You're answering messages too quickly. You're telling people things about yourself. You're being too open. You're being too available. You're, and so basically The Rules is this book that teaches you how to play hard to get. And there's this debate, right? Like parts of it really could be used manipulatively.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that Ryan thinks that I rulesed him a bit, but
You did.
I broke so many rules. I was answering, like he said, like I messaged back right away. And like there was a night that we first started talking, like the messages going back and forth. Like I wouldn't even show Kate. She was like, let me see your phone. How much were you messaging him? You have to stop. And, and it's like even so specific, like if he asks you out after Wednesday for that weekend, you have to say no because it's too soon. And I'm like, I'm a single mom. If he's asking me out on a Thursday and that's my weekend without like, that I can do that. So anyway, this book is, there's an updated one that's like, the rules. But it's really interesting because there have been times where, I wouldn't respond for a day or so. And then all of a sudden that interest is there, that game, right?
Yeah.
That when you accidentally rules someone, or they're thinking you were interested, but now you're not, and you're sort of doing this playing hard to get. That there is that it elicits that response.
Yeah,
and so the book is all about like how to kind of vet the man who's going to be worth marrying, and then get him to chase you. And be that kind of person. Part of the book is good, where it's like take pride in yourself. Like,
empowering in some way.
Empower yourself, and you have value, and your time is valuable, and you don't have to just wait by the phone and all of that. Like 50% of it is good, but the other 50% of it, I think, can be manipulative. And I think it's just an interesting book to.
It sounds interesting, and I'd be like you. I would be like, fuck you. I'm going to do whatever I want. And I think part of the problem today, when I look at my kids and I look at his generation with texting, it is a whole game thing. And I'm more prepared. I'm more inclined to be like you, that if I'm dating and the person texts me, I'm not thinking, what do I got to do? What's the etiquette here? I respond, or I call, and I do what my gut and my heart and my mind tells me. But then I watch my kids in this generation, and they're like, I said, well, she just texted you. Aren't you going to text her back? He goes, no, Mom, it's not cool to text right away. You got to wait. Like exactly what you're talking about. Rules of engagement today are so different. And I think, okay, wait a minute. Are we moving away too much from trusting ourselves and what we need and what we want? And at the end of the day, we could say, we all manipulate the situation because we are all trying to appease our ego. Yes, if we really want to get psychoanalytical about it, we are. But the way to appease me is to not increase my anxiety, but oh my God, I'm going to play this game and wait for the response. I feel better when I feel like I'm in charge and I'm going to do what I want to do, which is pick up the phone and respond, and not follow some socially, culturally prescribed rule and etiquette about texting. I'm like, fuck that. So there is that. I would be more inclined to do, and I do that myself. That's how I live my life. And I sometimes be called out to say, oh my God, you're not supposed to call. I texted you. I'm like, no, I want to call you because if I try to explain this to you, it might take 4 or 5 messages in a paragraph and I might have a miscommunication in there. And I don't want that. I want to go back to just picking up the phone and talking to you.
I don't know about all that. Texting.
I know, because you don't like to talk. You like to text, but I like to talk.
Yeah, there are times where I do think that it's important just to actually talk to people. I think you're totally right.
When you have to write a paragraph, you're better off with a conversation.
Yeah, I think there definitely was times in our initial part of our relationship that these rules were bad. For us, for me, it caused me some and I didn't realize at the time that you were following some dumbass book.
But I wasn't.
I'm sure
with
people
him.
love it. Or
I had the book. I had previously been, but I messed up with you. And
well, when you messed up, it was good. But if you ever,
so I don't know that I can ascribe to this book.
But I
don't ascribe to it.
But I think your friend is great. But I think all of her advice was dog shit.
Yeah, I think that you got it. Yeah, I think being human, like we were talking about earlier, we're all social creatures and we want to connect with each other. And sometimes it is just following the flow and the vibe of the relationship. Because if you play this game of, chase me, and we all kind of want to be chased. And there's a natural thing that happens between people when they first meet. Like, do you like me? Do you not like me? It's all about that, right? The dance of, is he into me? Is he not? And how do I find this out without getting hurt and hurting him and so forth? The flirtatious part, that whole... And that's fun and exciting. And it's almost like we've made it mechanical now, by having a book of, rules in terms of how and what we should do. What happened to let me read this vibe here and I'm going to go with that because I might have that vibe with you, but not with the other person. I might have to follow that rule thing with the other person. So I get it. It's a guideline and so forth, but let's trust our gut and trust our instincts at some point. They're not all fucked up.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it was definitely after I'd had, several things kind of blow up in my face that she initially brought it up.
She was trying to be helpful.
She was trying to be helpful, right?
Yeah.
And so there were, was I too open? Did I give too much attention? And that really is interesting because I do think that there's something to it. And I would be interested in your perspective because I didn't intentionally do rules with you, but I just had commitment scare. And so
fear of committing.
Yeah. So I accidentally rules because I was having this might get real.
Yeah. And then you're going to have to deal with your emotions and you're afraid to be hurt. So your guard would go up.
I told same friend, I was like, I'm asking him out for drinks and I have to be prepared to marry him because if not, it's super mean. Because he had.
Wait, how does it go from drinks to have to marry him?
After we had stopped talking for that month and a half or whatever.
I stopped talking because he was like, I want to be in a relationship, and if you're not going to be doing that, then don't. Yeah. And I was like, that would be mean.
Yes, that would be mean.
That would be mean. Right. And so I was like,
because you knew what his expectations were,
and I also knew I could be rejected.
Yes,
too,
you could be. Yeah,
right.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of I so wanted to tell you to fuck off, right? But also I didn't.
Yeah. Because you knew in your heart of hearts that she was the one.
I figured it was at least worth giving. Let's see what this is about, right? And give it a shot. But I did know, I definitely, I put myself out there with her more than I had with anyone else or probably would have.
Because you have a natural chemistry.
Yeah, it's just, you just kind of know, right? I do think you kind of know. And that's why rules, I think, are not, you can have some ideas of maybe where you can go wrong with things. Think about yourself and be like, oh man, maybe if I'm going to text with somebody, I don't ask a question, and then if I don't get a response right away, ask another one, and do totally bombard. But at the same time, if the vibe is there, you can text back right away.
Yeah.
You can do that. It's fine.
And you're making a good point in that rules are important for some people with things like that if they tend to be very impulsive.
Yeah.
And that impulsivity leads to destruction in their life and their relationships, right? If you're constantly blowing somebody's phone up because you can't control yourself, because you're wondering why they haven't texted you and you haven't given them enough time, then we need those kind of rules. But my rule for dating, and we all kind of have concrete rules or whatever. We have a guide, I call them guidelines. Is if I'm feeling it and I want to text, I'm going to do that. And if you're not cool with that, okay, now I've just learned that we don't have a vibe because you're not clicking with what I need, which is to communicate with you.
Yeah.
And I'm actually dealing with some people right now who are on completely different, they profess to love each other deeply, but they have very different needs and expectations of communicating with each other. And they're constantly fighting about, you didn't text me good night last night. You didn't even call me this morning. And it's creating such friction. And when I keep going back to, guys, you're completely incompatible on this level. How is this going to work? And I do believe that love is not enough. And I'm listening to this constant battle. And I'm thinking, listen, if I love you and you tell me, listen, every night I need you to text me good night. And I would say, oh, that's easy. I'll do that because you're important to me and I love you. It's not the way that I do things, but if you need that reassurance, absolutely, I'll do it for you. Mm-hmm. But when I'm hearing and listening to the incompatible and not wanting to do that, I'm like, okay, you clearly don't want to be in this because if you did, you'd fucking do it.
Absolutely.
It takes nothing to do that, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. Being wildly inflexible with certain things, there's fundamental issues with your relationship.
Absolutely fundamental issues, but not everybody wants to look at those issues. They want to kind of hide underneath it. Because it's easier. Because
love is not enough. I mean, Amanda, you and I, especially during the pandemic, we're stuck at home all day, every day, and had some I don't know, growing pains or whatever it might be, but like big conversations about like what we needed.
Yeah.
But I think the reason our relationship is where it is now is because we spent a lot of time doing that.
Yeah.
And we worked through it, and we wanted
for
to.
what we
Like
have.
we
Yeah.
wanted to be the person that the other person wanted.
Yes, because
Yeah.
you guys have this beauty of communicating with each other openly and honestly. And, you know, when we walked into the studio today, all three of us were like, well, we did this. What should we talk about today? I'm like, well, let's just have this open mic relationship thing.
Yeah.
But I think we just found the title, which is Love is Not Enough.
Absolutely.
It is not
Yeah.
enough. You can love someone to death, but it'll be the death of your relationship or the
Sure.
death of your identity because you're not necessarily compatible. To love somebody is not enough. I see so many relationships that people are just fighting to be with each other because they profess to love each other to the end, but they constantly fight. And I'm thinking, this is not love. This is a very unhealthy form of attachment. And as we were talking about earlier, Amanda, you and I were sharing this exchange about attachment. It's the fear of detaching from that person, the suffering that's going to take place that they don't want to deal with. So they hang on to this, what they think is love, to avoid the suffering. But guys, suffering is mostly our inability to adapt to different circumstances. It's
Yeah.
because we're holding on to the past and we want it to be a certain way, but the reality is telling us it's not that way, and we're fighting it. We're fighting it. Where if we learn to adapt to the new reality, it's not easy, that our suffering becomes less. When you break up with somebody, why is it hurting so much? It's because you're missing that reality that you had. You're missing that person, which is normal and natural. But the longer you hold on to that and then you get stuck in that situation, you're not going to be able to move forward in a healthy way. That suffering is going to stay with you, and you're just going to some people become
Yeah.
paralyzed and they
Right, it's
become
like their
suicidal.
identity and-
But they
yeah.
also become, on the other extreme,
Oh, sure,
suicidal.
right.
I've worked with people because they've lost their partner through divorce. They are suicidal because they cannot adapt to the new reality. They
Yeah.
cannot suffer through the suffering.
Right. Yeah, because it becomes too much, and
It's too much and overwhelming.
absolutely. Yeah, that detachment thing is so hard because, like, I think like most of my relationships when they end, like love was still there. It was everything else that wasn't.
Yeah.
And it's fucking hard to like
Very hard.
accept. Like my marriage went on, at least for many reasons, too long. Part of it was trying to stay together for the kids, but because it's just like you've done it for so long. Like,
Yeah.
what's it going to be? You're afraid to kind of like give up. You don't want to fail. Like all of
Yeah,
those
all those
things that
things.
go into like
Yeah.
what that detachment is going to be,
Yeah.
and then just afraid of like what my future is going to be, what the reality
Right.
is, like how I'm going to be able to. And you realize like you're going to be fine. Everything's going to be better. Everything's going to be just okay. Like you're going to move on and everything's going to be cool. Like you have to like allow yourself to grieve for a bit, but like you got to get out from the weight of that pretty quickly.
But
or
it's because
else
people don't want to experience and go through the suffering. Who does?
Yeah.
Nobody wants to.
Yeah.
But sometimes you don't have a choice.
Right.
You
Yeah,
have
absolutely.
to.
You got to do the hard thing because it's the thing that's right.
You have to. So you can just live in the suffering and then you're suffering anyway.
Yeah.
Or you work through
Yeah,
the suffering,
sure.
right? To get to the other
Yeah,
side.
what's worse, the suffering of being not with them and that detachment, or the suffering you're currently in
Yeah.
to the point where you kind of are considering doing it in the first place. So
Amanda?
I don't know. I think sometimes we also feel like if we move on too quickly, was it meaningful? Right? Like what did it all mean? So we feel like if, I've heard people say like if the relationship was X amount of time, it should take you X amount of time
Yeah.
to get past it,
Yeah.
which I think is just nonsense. I
There's
think
no
that there
formula.
right.
Yeah.
There are relationships that were short-lived that were so meaningful, and others that were longer that were just, passive. So I think that, it really depends on the situation.
Absolutely.
And the specific
And
relationship. It's so hard to box that in.
You can't. And it's not a form of like people will say, well, how did you move on? Like you were saying, you were married for so long. How do you move on? What choice is there? I have a choice to either die and have a miserable life, or I have a choice to move, and I didn't want to die, or I have a choice to move forward, go through the suffering, and realize that it had a season, it had a reason, and now I need to move on. It's when people are stuck in that. And people are also very judgmental about people who've been married and divorced. And how are you remarried again? How do you have another relationship?
There's not a time that you
There's
have
not
to
a time.
wait. Like,
No.
I got divorced. It's like, oh no, it's not been,
There's not a
12
timeline.
months, or is it this? Like, dude, you gotta move. You gotta move.
You
Your
have
life
to move
is
on.
life's too short, man.
We're still just a generation back. Like my dad, even on his deathbed was saying, I always loved your mother and was married to her in my heart. And even though I know she wanted the divorce, I never wanted it. And my dad was just, destroyed after their divorce, and he didn't know how to husband her the way that she wanted. And that's a whole separate, like they both did their own personal best, right?
Yeah.
But he suffered and stayed in that suffering. And I think it was this like self-punishment. I shouldn't maybe therapy my dad, but you think about your parents and his sadness that he had. My dad would be an interesting human to
analyze.
Yeah.
Right?
But he really held on to, telling people how much and me and my sister, how much he loved and still felt like she's still my wife.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like,
even after
she's
their
not,
divorce.
she's not your wife. She's remarried, and that's okay. Like, move on. We all say it's okay for you to move on, but he
could not.
And he, has a Lutheran background. My grandpa had like 13 brothers and sisters on a farm, my mom was very Catholic. So there's this feeling about marriage that is still like, I grew up in the Catholic Church, like going every Sunday till I was, 13.
Yeah.
And my views are very different from that, but I'm still just one generation away from it.
Yeah.
And so that guilt of like eternal.
Yeah. But it also I didn't get to know him too much before he passed, but it almost seemed like
I'm so glad you met my dad.
That was to like the detriment of his health and maybe part of why he had passed a little younger than he maybe
How old
should
was
have.
he when he died?
63.
Yeah, that's young.
Yeah, because even with like some small health issues, it's like he didn't maybe take it as seriously of like trying to get better.
He had cancer, I think, for a long time before he was diagnosed.
Yeah.
And then it took him an even longer time to tell us, and then he would lie about treatment.
Yeah, he was trying to protect
he said
everybody.
he was in remission when he was moving
not.
towards palliative care.
Oh,
and I think he really, and this goes back to like, I love therapy. I think everyone should be in therapy. I think that would have helped him, and by extension, the rest of the family. But I think he suffered a lot over not ever finding a way to really detach from my mom.
Yeah, he couldn't. He didn't. He chose not to, and then he couldn't. And who knows what his narrative is inside, and what he grew up with, and how he learned to attach and detach.
And it's a tragic story and has its own beauty, but it's still a tragedy that maybe didn't need to have that much suffering.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he never really like had a meaningful relationship after your mom, did he?
Not really. A few women that he would sort of love from afar and do lots of favors and loving things for, but nobody that he had that real intimate romantic connection with.
Yeah.
And he had a lot to give.
Yeah. So he actually probably believed, if he was here today and we asked him, that she was the soulmate and she was that one person for him.
100%.
And there would be no other person.
100%.
Which is kind of what we started to talk about. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
A leaf, they were at a dance together at Carroll College. A leaf blew in, fell on her lap. That's the day he decided he was going to marry her.
Yeah.
Leaf blew in a window. That's the woman for me. And so romantic and sweet, but they, it's so young.
Yeah.
But it just.
And no other woman, he never, was able to open himself up to a new person because he decided that he wanted to be in that suffering for whatever reason. And maybe it was to punish himself for some of the things that, he didn't succeed in the marriage. Who knows? I don't know that, right? We don't know. But I always think that what is it about some people that they choose to live in their suffering rather than work through it? And we can't just jump over the suffering because we wish we could. And we've all suffered. I've suffered. I'm sure you have.
Of course.
Everybody in life suffers of something. And that at some point we have to make a choice. Am I just going to live in this place? Or I need to work through it, walk through it so I can get to the other side where I can thrive. Because there is life after suffering.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that people really overlook how that suffering and stress and all of those things, mental health can really affect your physical well-being.
Yeah.
And how you take care of yourself. And even I really do truly believe that like those sort of like negative emotions can manifest in
physically.
And I don't want to say it causes cancer, but like damn near.
Well, they do have a lot of research in terms of when they look at elderly people or people who have cancer, when they have an amazing support system around them, that they tend to live longer.
Yeah.
And the quality of life is better and they live longer. So there's a lot to be said for this universal, I believe, our DNA, our desire to connect and be connected to each other, as we started off talking about earlier on in this podcast, our need to connect with people, and that we are not pathological because we have needs. And this word of codependency, which I hate, can be very unhealthy. And then we end up thinking there's something wrong with us when we need somebody and we want somebody, because as a society, we tend to romanticize that, no, you should not need anyone. You should be able to stand on your own 2 feet. I'm like, well, I can stand on my own 2 feet and I can still need somebody because I want somebody. And that's how we are wired to be
it's not
in
weakness.
Relationships. It's not a weakness. And particularly for men are made to feel, as you know, Ryan, even though it's 2024, that somehow there's something wrong with men if they need women or if they need their brothers or if they need their moms, and irrespective of age.
Even just talking about like emotions and things in general, like I as I've gotten older, like I feel like we need to be much more in tune with our feelings and that, and like, I have no problem saying I love you to my friends, like male, female, anything else, and talking
and hugging them. You're allowed to hug.
Right, and being like, it's okay. Like, I'm sad. I need someone to talk to, whatever it might be, because any of that stuff is only at the detriment of yourself. And like, I am not less of a man because I have feelings and emotions or cry or this, that, or whatever. Like, if anything, it makes us more evolved and better.
Yeah. And people think, and especially men, that somehow if they talk about these things, it doesn't make them, it makes them less of men. And, even 2024, I have to keep saying this to people in my office and also on all my social media platforms. Guys, men, it is okay that you feel depressed and sad at times. You don't have to hide it and couch it. And often in men, we're now talking about depression, but it's important to relationships, because if we're in a heterosexual relationship, men are 50% of that relationship. And if we can't understand the psychology and emotions of men, then how are we trying to improve our relationships?
Sure.
It comes out differently. It comes out in irritation. It comes out in anger. It comes out in high-risk behavior. And I'll often hear, well, he's such an asshole, my husband. I don't know what the fuck is wrong with him. He's acting like this. I'm like, and then when I get to learn more about him, he's not angry. He's not any of those things. He's actually just really depressed.
Yeah, I think depression and anxiety manifest themselves in anger more. In that.
Yeah, well, for men especially, women, we manifest it in sadness. We are sad, but that's the role that we've been kind of socialized, that it's okay for us to do that, right, and express those emotions.
It's not codependency, right?
What's not codependency?
All of this.
We're all codependent. Can I just say that?
Having emotions, and wanting support from people, and that is not this negative thing of codependency.
Well, what's the other side of it is a really dark word, is isolation. And we all know isolation is not, we're not going, well, what would be best for that person is some isolation from mankind. Like nobody's
let's lock them up. Like what
said no therapist ever. I think you need to be more isolated. That's not
what did we learn from COVID? What did we learn from COVID? Right? That we needed each other, right?
Absolutely.
We were forced to isolate, and thank God we had the internet. We had, these platforms that we could use to connect with each other. If anything, it proves that we are totally codependent on each other. together as a society, as a world, as a human species, and we need each other, and we need some people need other people differently. We're not needy. There's not something wrong with us. And I'm Indian. I'm from India, born in India. So I was raised in, an Indian culture. My parents, my patriarchy culture. You guys can read it in my book all about my history.
What's your book?
Unfuck Your Life and Relationships. Simon & Schuster on Amazon.
Amazon. Oh.
But I want to point out in the Indian culture, you don't leave home unless you get married or whatever, and then you live very close. And in India, people live together. And my whole point is the cohabitation. I think if we did a study, and I'm sure there's many studies out there, I don't have one at the top of my head, is that I think there's probably less depression and less anxiety expressed in those countries, or not even expressed, prevalence of it, because people are always there to support each other. They cohabitate. They live together. Generations live together. Here, people live in isolation. We all live in our little boxes, and we're lucky if we have a partner, we have a family that we can go to when we have an issue. But when we don't have that, there is isolation, loneliness that leads to other things like high-risk behaviors, particularly in men, alcohol and drug abuse. I bet if we did a study, and I'm going to pull this out, that those kinds of cultures have less of that because there's always somebody to go to and they're never alone.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like Hispanic families too will typically
strong sense of family and
absolutely.
community.
Yeah, I mean that's a really big deal.
There's your antidepressant right there. I'm serious. There's your antidepressant right there.
We're not all Henry David Thoreau locks himself in a cabin for 10 years and writes a dope book. That's not really a thing that happened.
Work at it.
Yeah,
that connection. And I have to, I'm having lunch with this friend tomorrow and had to call and make another plan. And it feels like this slog.
They don't need to, in those cultures, in my culture, and I find myself going through that transition as much as my family can annoy the shit out of me, which most people do. I fucking love them to death. And when I went through my divorce, I ran to my family and literally they cocooned me and I was planning to live. They're like, just move in here. Why would you go live by yourself when my kids are older? And I stayed there for 3 months and I literally could have not come back and spent my whole life there. But I have a daughter here. It's more complicated. But I'm like, this is how people survive. This is why I'm not, I was sad and went through some depression, all that kind of stuff. But literally I thought, this is a great way of living. Because I always had someone.
Yeah.
It was not an empty house. I was not alone. When I wanted to be alone, I could get my alone time. But I had this support system. And they weren't smothering, but I was part of a community, I felt. I was part of a system. When people live in isolation, again, you made a great point. It leads to all these kinds of behaviors and feelings. And then you have to actively search out. But when you live like that, you don't have to actively search it out. It's there.
I think, people, they want community. You even look at when people that spend a lot of time playing online video games, those become communities of people that they have then identities and all of that stuff. You always look for that. We all group together in that way, whatever we're doing.
But what we're missing in that, and the whole thing with social media and digital communication and all that, and it was great for COVID. We are missing the physical connection, the physical touching. And we know when we get touched by somebody, we get hugged in an affectionate manner. Oxytocin in our brain is released. We don't need to take a pill. Dopamine, we get this rush. We need to be touched. And there are people out there who don't get touched.
See, Amanda, that's why I tell you that I want you to pet me all the time, and I'm not weird. I'm not needy.
What are you talking about?
Say you're weird.
I don't know if you ascribe to the love languages thing, but I did
it's about
that.
Expectations.
And I'm really big into physical touch. I'm non-sexual physical touch.
Affectionate touch. Let's call it affectionate touch.
Yeah, Amanda's a little different. And which is fine.
Yeah.
But so we've had to work with me expressing my needs. And I'm like, if we're on the couch, I'm going to massage you and I'm going to do that and I'm going to touch you. But I just rub my head or rub my leg or touch my that or just, it really brings a lot to me. And it's chemically as well as all the other things.
I mean, they've done studies. They have research.
Easy. He asks and I do it because I don't mind doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
know,
mean, I'm
like-
not asking for anything crazy.
And not even like don't mind. Like I'm like, oh, that makes him happy.
Yeah,
And
but
it's
probably
easy.
you didn't
I just
grow-
didn't know.
You may not have grown up in a
You
situation
did not
like
grow
that.
up with that, right? So it's different for you, but I'm sure you get benefits too from being touched
absolutely.
and touching. But I want to say touch is so important, and in our society culture today, we always think about it as being sexual. It's not. We all need affectionate touch, and we did a recent podcast on physical intimacy, in particular sex.
Yeah.
Is like physical intimacy is not just intercourse, it's being touched. And I'm so glad you brought that up. I'm Indian, and the Indian culture, we touch a lot. We hug a lot. We kiss each other a lot. Men hug each other. Men kiss each other.
Yeah.
And I went to India, 20 years ago, and men holding hands, men sitting on top of each other in the train.
Oh, really?
And yeah. And then we think, oh my God, this is so weird. It's not. It's
No.
because they're buddies, they're best friends. and
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, it's this culturally ascribed norms that here men don't do that. You got to be gay or something wrong with you.
Yeah.
No, but
Oh my
going
gosh,
back
right?
to that whole thing about, I think when we are together with people and when we are connected, we are codependent and we need
Mhm.
in a healthy manner. That's the term, I guess, in a healthy manner, but that can be
Yeah.
different for a lot of people. And sometimes, if you're looking in from a Western lens into, what happens with my family when I was living with them, I think, oh my God, you're so enmeshed, you're so entangled, all these clinical words. And I can say that with confidence as a therapist. I think I'd rather be a little bit enmeshed and a little bit over entangled than be isolated and be alone. And that might be an extreme, but even now I live here in Milwaukee with my daughter. I'm missing that family setting. I grew up like that, and I totally am missing that sometimes. And I wish I
Yeah.
could just go over. But I grew up like that. And then I just adapted to the new way. But I don't necessarily think it's better. I'm just now have to live this way because we live, we live so far away from each other, different
Sure.
countries. Yeah. Communal living. I know some people are like, no fucking way I live with my mother-in-law or my own mother. If you have enough space, and you grew up with, and you learn to embrace that part, then, and we reframe it to look at it differently, you might not think about it that way. Think about the
Yeah.
things you do in your daily life to find a connection. Imagine you were able to build that connection with your family or your closest of friends. I'm all for communal living. Who wants to communally live with me?
Yeah.
I wish I at least had
Anybody send me a DM.
I wish I at least had like a coffee neighbor. Like I
Yes.
remember like my mom would have, Sue who lived across the street
Yeah.
and Darlene who lived next door. And then the Kaylors behind, and they were over at the house and they would have coffee and watching
Yeah.
each other's kids. And it was all like, I don't have a neighbor or a friend that's close enough that I'd be like, oh, I'm making another pot of coffee. Just walk across the street and
Yeah.
let's hang out.
Yeah.
And what happened with that? Like, why are neighbors so different?
Because people live in their box. No, I think it's
Yeah.
because we become more isolated society. We're much more individualistic because that's romantic and promoted. And I agree with you. I always grew up with people who were always at my house, and the Indian culture is like that. Come over. And my mother was a stay-at-home mom. She's always cooking something, and everybody loved her cooking. She's a great cook. And I brought that with me when I got married. I married somebody who's British, completely not like that. There had to be invitation, and he evolved and learned with me. I was always the one having people over. I was always the one having parties. And now, that part of my life ended through divorce, and I'm living in a city, a very different environment. I love the city, but I'm missing that sense of, who's my neighbor? Oh, my neighbor is a student who goes to UW. I'm not interested in hanging out with me, but I miss that communal feeling, and I feel isolated sometimes. And I think, how do I get that back? But it's like you, I have to manufacture it. I have to call this person, call that person, and reach out. It's not naturally happening because I just, don't have that around me immediately.
I mean, there's always people at the studio. I always have friends.
Oh, you do? I'm going to come hang out.
Yeah,
in the studio
like
more.
Diego's always around.
Yeah, I love Diego.
and
He's not
Tyler.
here.
Tyler's
I know.
here.
But there's
and
a sense
yeah.
of community and a sense of family that I think we are really missing today. And then we are very quick to, pathologize things that I think are very natural. Like we started off at the beginning of this podcast. What is our human nature? Our human nature is to be together, is to be connected. And it doesn't matter where you come from in this world. That is a commonality amongst all of us. And somehow we've come to over pathologize it. And I say that I'm a therapist myself, and I see real pathology, whatever when people are really in destructive situations. But to me, when I listen to people today and I think, no, those are normal things, but somehow we've come to make them that there's something wrong with these things. And we start playing games like you were talking about, rules of engagement. Why can't we just be human with each other? What is this?
It's exhausting.
It's exhausting
Try to remember
play games.
what to do.
That's why when I hear like my son saying, you gotta wait, I'm like, no, I'm not gonna do that. That's playing games. I'm just gonna do this. And maybe that comes with age, that you become more confident and you're like, okay, if this is not gonna, work with me, then I'm gonna move on to the next person because I don't want that fake artificial relationship. I want a deep connection with somebody. And if you're not my somebody, then there'll be somebody else. Again, because there's 7 billion people on the planet. If I can't have a connection with you, there's got to be somebody else, right?
Odds are ever in your favor.
But again, we walked into the studio and I just want to say to everybody listening out there, we are all looking to be connected with someone. Mm-hmm. Relationships are the cornerstones of our lives, the one we have with ourselves and the one we have within our community, with our family. And if sometimes you feel you don't want relationships or you don't like people, it's probably because you've been really hurt. But you do need that and you probably do want that. You just gotta, work with your defenses and find a really good therapist. I know one.
Yeah,
do you know
absolutely.
Of any good therapists?
Or find a really cool podcast to listen to because then you have your friends driving around with you all the time having a cool conversation.
Yeah. But they do, like we were saying earlier, bring out the best of emotions, but they also bring out the worst of emotions. Yeah. But I will tell you, if you can get and work through the worst of emotions, which is generally the suffering and the detachment and the loss, you can get to the place of where you want to attach to somebody else again. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? All right, guys. We will talk to you again next week. Thank you so much for this kind of ad-lib.
Yeah, we went on a journey, but I really liked it.
It was cool.
It was a good one.
Bye, guys.
Unfuck Your Life and Relationships is recorded at High Five Studio in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Unfuck your life! Unfuck your life!